Well, that's how it evolved. I guess we need to get into like how it kind of came to an end. Did you have any sort of inclination that, you guys are going to be moved on, or how did that come about? Was it a surprise or what?
No, there really wasn't. I mean, it was a surprise, actually. Even though there were two operations that happened, like I said, prior to all of this in the early 80s, in 83 and 84 consecutively, because,
Right.
you know, first one, like I said, wasn't that, just successful. And the second time they knew they were coming, everybody just sat around and waited for it to happen, and then they took their lumps. But at that time, they were taking the older generations and the guys that were more visible.
Right.
you know they even at that time still had no clue the magnitude of that of which you know they had got themselves into. They didn't know that better than half the town was involved, and it was mostly the kids was doing work. They didn't have, who would have thought that you
Yeah.
know so when those two operations came by, and then us kids took over, and that's a bit of a story in and of itself. I had at one time, um, when we did the one night we did 55 tons, we brought in 110,000 pounds, and we built, I think, three or four houses on the island in order to get all that stuff on the island, and it has to happen between sundown and sun up,
Right.
when you're unloading a freighter. So, but during the daylight hours is when the shore crew takes over and we're loading them and sending them to Miami. That's when the shit gets moved in broad daylight,
Yeah.
because we were masters of hide in plain sight. And who would suspect that almost, you know, 9 out of every 10 cars leaving the island, or leaving Everglades City at that time were loaded with shit. Nobody would have ever thought that. So, and 9 times out of 10, we're waving at law enforcement as we're driving past them, taking this shit out of town. But um, to do something like that, was a bit of an undertaking. And it took us, the first two generations to get it to, a workable, and a successful type of operation. But when they took all those grown-ups and adults finally went to prison, when they didn't realize that the kids, were doing all the work, that's how the third generation of us the kids took over. When they went to prison, we did a job. I was saying we did that 55 tons that one night, and I made $75,000 just in a night's work.
Right.
So that next day, mid morning, I'm over at the house where the shit's at, just see how it's going, and this kind of thing. And Daryl, one of the brothers of the second generations, whose kids I grew up with, he says, "Hey Timmy," he says, "Come here." And I'm doing this, oh fuck, here we go. So he says, I need somebody that I can trust, and somebody that can drive this to Miami for me, because it couldn't go to the spot that we were doing the dead drops. And that's where the government came up with the term dead drop, because our gals would drive to a plaza, like I said, in Kendall or Coral Gables or someplace like that, get out of the car, truck or van or whatever it is that's loaded, window shop for a while we have a guy over there pointing out, say, "That's our truck, that's our car, this is us." And the Cuban guy partner would get in it, go unload it to wherever their stash was, and bring it back empty. Our guys would take it back to Everglades and run as many trips as they could until that house is empty, because we're going to probably fill the fucker again that next night.
Yeah.
So there was a buffer between us and the people on the other side. They didn't know where the shit in Miami was, we didn't, and they didn't know where the shit in Everglades was, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But um, several days prior to this, we're still working every night, but during the day, several days prior to this huge load, Daryl gives me and a buddy of mine, Jimmy, a chainsaw and a wrecking bar, and he points to this brand new Winnebago, and he goes, "I need you guys to go in there and then take and cut everything. I mean, strip this goddamn thing clean from the cabinets down. Leave the curtains and the cabinets and everything up above it. So when you look, you look in the window, you see the
Looks
cabinets
normal.
and the curtains and all that shit. But if
Yeah.
you got up there and you looked in the fuck like that, it's hot from one window to the next like this. We even took out the seats, and put, about 10,000 pounds of bales in this damn Winnebago. And it had to put airbags in the springs and inflate them, so this thing wasn't sparking the highway when you're going down to Miami with it. So Daryl says, "Hey Timmy," he says, "I need a favor." He says, "I need somebody to drive this thing to Miami, and I needed to be somebody I can trust, because you got to stay there all day. And when the loads are done coming for that day, drive a car full of money back for me. But the biggest thing of it was that it couldn't go to the dead drop spot with the plaza, because I mean, you got within, 30, 40 feet of this fucking thing, you can smell it, it was, so there was no way it was going into a plaza. So I said, okay, he said, I'll give you 35 grand just to drive it over there. It's a 2-hour drive. And I relented, okay, whatever. And I'd always been offshore working with a chase boat. I had my way to get out of there, man. But, it never, I was never afraid of getting caught on a boatload of shit because of that boat riding right there. That was our getaway. Well, like I said, when you're driving on the road, there's spotters. You're never alone. And everybody working, we had like 200 2-meter radios that had 5 different digit combination that you could choose from, and that were virtually unscannable at that time. So everybody's talking, because communication is key, so I get in this thing as behemoth, and I'm driving, and I had, I had to drive it to this house out in an orange grove just off of Chrome Avenue, almost a homestead. And I'm in going through this orange grove, and all of a sudden I see this house that just does not belong there. It looks like a medieval castle, literally, with the spires and the kind of shit, I'm thinking, what the fuck is this? I pull up next to the house, and here out jumps a bunch of Cuban guys, and they start unloading this shit. So I go in the house, and I'm hanging out all day long. We're playing cards, and these guys are drinking and shit. And I get to know a couple of the guys that were there, because I'm there all day long. So that evening, I get the cars full of cash. I drive the cash back, and that gets behind me. And then several months later, here comes that second operation, Everglades #2, when everybody else just all of a sudden, it's over with. The adults that were putting us kids to work were gone. And I, not too much longer after that, I get a knock on my door. I'm living in a place called Golden Gate, just north of Everglades City at that time, in a house that I just bought from a Cuban friend of mine. And it turns out to be this guy, George, who I had met while I was at that house. They found, he said, it took us 3.5 weeks to find you, because they only knew what I looked like, and they knew my name was Timmy. So they're all over town asking, this guy Timmy, and finally they find, I get a knock on the door, and here's this guy George, and he says, Timmy, and I'm like, George, what the fuck, man? And he says, we got work to do, brother. He says, can you do this? And I just looked at him, without skipping a beat. I said, hell yeah, fuck that I know, I mean, but we were the infrastructure, the kids. We were doing the work. We were humping and bumping and moving and loading and doing all the shit that needed to be done. What I didn't know at that time was what happened prior to that. Where do you go? How much do you spend? Who do you talk to? And all these connections around the Caribbean. Well, they were, I inherited those from one of the older generations, while they were doing, coming out of their time or doing their time and like that. So I got hooked up in that way. And that's how I managed to start putting the deals together and started working the guys, because of that, just that one day. And it, that serendipitously just sort of fell right into it. I didn't choose to be it. I wasn't looking to be the guy that was putting everybody to work, but all of a sudden here I am, the guy flying with 2 Cuban partners out with a private jet that Carlito and Leo owned, a corporate Lear. And it's only a 5.5 hour, at the most 5.5 hour flight to Colombia. So there came a point in time where I did their first load for them, and then I found myself flying to Colombia in the morning, picking out 20, 30, 40 tons of stuff, and flying back home, driving back to Naples, and sitting across the bar, here in town with, my girlfriend bartender, by 9 o'clock that night. And she or none of my friends had known I'd been to Colombia that day, fucking around, so that's just a day in the life of, man, that sort of thing.
So when you got busted, like, how did that come about? Like, did they just catch you in the act, or somebody rolled, somebody ran? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it was, there were so many people. I mean, there were so many pot haulers at that time, because like I said, there were 5 crews actively working in those days. And, like I say, it takes as many as 70 plus people per crew to make one job work. So there's a lot of pot haulers, and And, you know, in Everglades, when we're working night after night after night after night, the reason half the town's involved in it is because you can't keep working the same people, man. You're just going to kill their asses,
Yeah.
you know. But, you know, that being said, there had been, you know, one of the guys that was working really was part of the family in Everglades. And I won't say any names because it's, you know, it's not up to me to implicate those that were or were not implicated. But um, this individual wound up, you know, and what guys do when they're not working in hauling pot, nobody gives a shit. I don't care what the crew's doing as long as they're there when it comes time to work, you know. Well, he's down in Colombia making these cocaine deals on his own, and he gets fucked up and winds up in prison, and you know, in Colombia, in Medellin. And the U.S. government realizes that he's from Southwest Florida, he's part of the crew, so they go down there and make him a deal. They say, look, we'll get you out of this hellhole of a prison you're in. Here's what we need you to do for us. So they send him right back home, and he gets right back into work, and none of us have a clue that
Yeah.
he'd ever been in trouble, and he'd been doing whatever and like that. So he actually became the chase boat driver for a job that I had set up to be unloaded on Everglades City and Pine Island. Was 57,000 pounds, and I decided to split the load. Half go to Pine Island in the north and half go to Everglades City in the south. Well, he was in on the job right from the beginning, and needless to say, so was the fucking law.
Yeah.
So they kind of knew what was going on. And that night on Pine Island, I decided to go work with the Pine Island crew because they weren't my crew. I trusted that the guys in Everglades knew what they were doing. I didn't need to be there. I wanted to be with the northern crew because I had not worked with them, you know, all that much. So I wanted to kind of keep a handle on that firsthand. So we're out in the woods in the middle of nowhere on Pine Island where nobody should be, in an old rickety dock out in the woods. And I backed up a U-Haul trailer, a truck, you know, box truck back in through the woods, through the trees, and waited for the little boats to start coming. They'd show up, we'd unload that, throw that in, and then in the boats, and that scenario started, and about 5-6 boats had come, and all of a sudden there's no more boats showing up. And I'm wondering, what the fuck's going on? There's no more chatter on the radio, nobody's talking. Voice comes over my radio, and there's this one, my spotter out by the road says, Tim, he says, a car just pulled in here, you know, backed out and went back down the road. And I'm thinking, you know, there's no way anybody should even be out here, man.
Right.
You know, so I walk out through the woods to the road, and I'm saying, you know, he said, yeah, they just pulled right up in here, and, you know, and turned around, backed out and left, you know. And I looked behind me, and everybody that was at the dock is now standing behind me because this ain't right. You know, we weren't standing there for 2 minutes, and all of a sudden it sounded like 40 cars coming down the road. You could hear them, and everybody just took off running because we know shit was going to hit the fan. And where I was standing looking at the road, if you ran to the left, there was a pine tree forest that you could run your ass off and just keep running.
Right.
Well, to the right was about 2 acres of palmetto field, and palmettos aren't but maybe waist high, if they're even, you know, a little bit higher than that. And which way do I go? I go the palmetto way. I'm screwed. And that night, a Cuban guy came in with the load. It wasn't uncommon for guys to hitch a ride and come in with a load, you know, illegals or whatever like this. And he runs the same way as me. And I didn't get from where we were standing on the little, you know, pathway, driveway, if you will, you know, for the cars and trucks to come into. I didn't get 25, 30 feet away, and I had to get down right away. I'm down, you know, trying to get down below these palmettos, and I can see the guys getting out of the vehicles. I can see their feet, the officers. There's some running that way. There's some running over there. He says, I'll go back. You know, I hear all these guys doing this shit, and I can hear this fucking Cuban guy crunching through the palmettos back here behind me. Like, crunch, crunch, crunch. And I'm thinking to myself, motherfucker, just stop what you're doing, because if they take off running after him, they're going to trip over my ass because I'm sitting right there. I can see them. You know, that's how close I am. But it's dark out. So all, you know, for the next 3 hours or so, I'm sitting there listening to it. And when I sat down, I didn't sit down. I was just hunched down on my, you know, crouched down, you know, in a squat. And the dry, crunchy, dry palmetto branches that I was standing on, every time I moved, they would crackle and crunch. So I had to wait for somebody to to talk or shut a door or a car to drive by where I could finally ultimately get my feet out from under me because they were dead. Blood had gone out of them and they were numb. I couldn't walk. I'm just, if I wanted to, I couldn't. So I get down and I get the blood pumping back into my legs and shit, and sitting there, and then I'm listening to all this take place, and they're not catching anybody because everybody's running like a motherfucker, and the sun's starting to come up, and I'm thinking, oh my God, if I wait another 15 minutes, the sun's going to be up, and here I am. I'm right there. You can see me. That's how close I was. So sun's come up, and I had heard prior, a few minutes earlier, a car had pulled up out front on the road and had stopped, but it was still running. And the guy, I was watching this beige Bronco come and go, and the Bronco came back, and the guy got out. I could see his feet. And he got out, and the person who was in the car on the road said, what are you doing? Where are you going? And he said, this guy in the Bronco says, well, I'm going to walk back here and see what we got, back here in the woods. And the guy goes, wait, I'll go with you. And I'm thinking, well, okay, this could be my chance, but I didn't know if there was anybody else in that car out in the street other than the one guy. Because if I lift my head up and look and he sees me, one of two things are going to happen. He's either going to shoot me, or I'm going to run him over and knock his ass the fuck out and take off running like a bat out of hell. And as soon as those two guys took off and started walking back to where, we were unloading at the dock and where my box truck was at, I kind of, lifted my head up real slowly like that. I looked, there was nobody in that cop car. And dude, I took off, man. I went across the road, through the ditch, and I went into the woods, and I ran till I couldn't breathe anymore, dove under a pile of bushes and covered myself up with leaves and shit. And I'm laying there, and I'm, all day long, I'm waiting for somebody to catch up with me and nab my ass, because I'm thinking, so many guys, so many cops out there, or whoever they were, and somebody had to have seen me, I thought, but apparently nobody did. So I'm laying there, and I'm all covered up. And I laid there most of the day, and I'm listening to the helicopters flying around. I'm listening to them towing the box truck out from the trees and the branches, and bang, 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 and shit like this. And this is the part where, I kind of, dozed off because I'm up all night. And all of a sudden, I got this urge. I haven't taken a shit since the afternoon before. So, now no better time than ever. So I get out, I'm doing my thing, and I got up. Now all I've got is a wad of $100 bills in my pocket to wipe my ass with. And I think it took me like $600 to wipe my ass and just left that shit there, So I moved over back on the trees and covered myself up and all, my face with the leaves and branches like this. And I just kind of dozed off, because I'm waiting for, night falls so I can get the hell out of there. And I don't know how it happened or if a noise or the movement woke me, but I happened to just open my eyes and I looked over, and there's a bobcat, about 3 feet from me, and he's stepping like this, looking right at my, right at my face. And he sees my eyes open, and it stops. And I'm thinking, holy fucking shit, man. I just ran my ass off out of, to get away from cops, and now I'm going to get attacked by this fucking thing. And I didn't have a clue what to do other than, it just came to me, and I just, come out of the leaves like that, and I yelled, ah, like that, and this thing flipped like 3 times, and it took off like it was shot out of a fucking cannon. It just took off and left me there, So I waited the rest of the afternoon till dark, and I walked up to a fish house 3 miles down the road, on the side of the road, through all the bushes and shit. This is that next night.
Yeah.
And I get to the fish house like 2 a.m, and there's people in the fish house. There's lights on in the parking lot, but there's no activity outside or anything like that. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out, and there's a phone booth. This is before cell phones. There's a phone booth in the parking lot of this fish house. And I'm thinking, how the fuck am I going to get to that phone booth? Without somebody spotting me, or it would just look weird if some guy at 2 a.m, shows up out of nowhere in the bushes. I picked all this shit off of me. And while I was doing that, 2 shrimp boats pulled up, and their crews unload, and they get off, and they line up at the phone booth to call their rides to, hey, we're on to come get them. So I thought, oh, this is perfect. So I just, kind of strolled out from the trees and went down there and got in line with them. And when it was my turn, I got in there and opened the phone book up to the taxis, and I called the first taxi cab number I found in the book. And this guy said, dude, I told him where I was at. I said, come and get me. He said, I got to get out of here. It's time to go home. I just got in from fishing. Blah, blah. And the guy says, you know what? He says, dude, I'm kind of hell and gone from where you are. He says, you don't want to call somebody else? And I said, look, dude, I don't have time for this shit. Just show up. I'll give you $700 on top of whatever your fee is if you just show the fuck up and get me home. And he says, you're not shitting me. And I said, no, dude. I said, I'm serious as a heart attack. Come on. So I hung the phone up, and I'm standing around out there mingling with the guys. But as I'm on the phone talking, here comes a sheriff car through the parking lot real slow. And he goes around like this, and he goes out, and then he takes off, and I'm just about shitting myself the whole time. And that's what I told the guy. I said, get your ass here now as quick as you can. So it was about 40 minutes later. Here he comes. And the first thing I did was threw $700 in his lap, got in the back seat, and I got down like this, and I said, let's go. Get me out of here. So we drove into Punta Gorda, which is, not too far away, just a little bit south of Pine Island, to a hotel. And that's where I spent the night, man. I wound up getting my ass out of there.
So,
but that wasn't the end of it, though.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. Kind of the deal that y'all were able to pull off, because when they arrested everybody, what were they originally wanting to charge you? They was wanting to give you life, right? Or pretty close to it?
Yeah, multiple life, because, we were operating for all those years as kids, and the adults and stuff. And as we're learning through this, the early 70s, late 70s and the early 80s, the guidelines, the federal sentencing guidelines for things such as, what we were doing, weren't really having any, dramatic effect on, stopping and halting what it was they were trying to stop, which was the smuggling, because the sentences were such, like I said earlier, a guy get caught on a boatload of the shit, or even a truck or a carload of the shit, and they'd give him, 12, 14 months, minus the good time, minus statutory good time, you're talking about 7-8 months, and then you're back home again. So we just pay the bills, keep the lights on, keep the family fed if that's the case, or whatever, and, put you right back to work when you get home. But little did we know, as the years were going by, here it is in 1987, September 1st, 1987, they changed the federal sentencing guidelines across the board to mandatory minimums. Now, if you're caught with, the amounts that we were dealing with, and then they put the amount at 200 kilograms. 2,000 kilograms. If you're caught with more than that, now you have an indictment with 4 counts on the indictment. Each count is a mandatory 10 years to life and $1 million, $4 million on your indictment. So this was their idea of creating a deterrent, because the sentencing obviously wasn't working, so we were the ones that, I'm sorry to say, fucked everything up for everybody else in the country, because they had to change these to mandatories in order to stop the flow of marijuana coming into South Florida, or stem the flow of the majority of it, as if you will. So we didn't know this. So we're still operating under the guys that, hey, you're just going to get a little one of these and, you'll be back kind of thing. Well, that wasn't the case. The case was, and when they got this guy out of Colombia, and, here they come and they jump my job, the investigation starts after that. Now they're picking on kids that were, 20 years old and 21 years old. Now I'm 25, 26. I was that old running boats through the islands, when I was a kid. So that was nothing unusual. Well, you take a kid that's that old now and you pull him aside and say, look, dude, this is no more a slap on the wrist. This is serious shit. You have a minimum of 40 years. And because it's mandatory, the judges have lost their discretion when it comes to sentencing. It's now all done by slide rule kind of shit. It's all out of their hands. There's nothing they can do about it unless you offer them substantial cooperation. Now, by offering substantial cooperation and giving up, your friends and telling how it was and how it was done and what you were involved in, would then allow the judge to sentence you below the mandatory minimums, because it's a Title 18, a section Rule 35, it's what it's called, offering testimony in order to get your sentence reduced below the mandatory minimums. So what the United States government did after after having research in this and becoming friends with some of the agents who arrested me back in that day, kind of let me know how that scenario took place, and that where um, they were kids were getting taken and arrested. I was one of the first 38 to go when the Operation of Peacemaker was ours. That was in '87, Operation Peacemaker, operation in '88. The first 38, the headline of the Naples Daily News read, in big letters across the top of the page, area part of U.S. pot dragnet. And then the subtitled article in the middle said, agents say 38 helped import over 150 tons. And they put 5 names in there. Mine was the second name on the list. Plus 2 pictures of, one of my guys, 2 of my crewmen being escorted out of the Everglades City Jail to the Fort Myers Federal Building. And what wound up happening was that as the arrests were being effected and time goes on, what they finally discovered was that 150 tons plus, or just shy of 400,000 pounds, was only about a week's work for us kids. That's when their mind went, because they had no clue. And as many kids, because now there's no more adults. I mean, very few, if you will, rather involved in what was going on now, because we took everything to the next level as kids. We had some cool toys, man. It was just, awesome. But what they did, the United States government, that is, by design rather than by accident, in the wording of their plea deals that they're making for these kids, the only way to get out from under a mandatory sentence is, like I said, was to cooperate.
Right.
Well, they gave them the opportunity to cooperate, but in doing so, they also gave them immunity from prosecution from everything that they had done, so they can spill their guts and not worry about any reciprocity because of it. But they have to hold one smaller count in reserve, because they got to do something.
Right.
They got to give you a smack on the wrist. They give you, a couple of months, or they can send you home if they choose to on probation or whatever like that. But you have to offer this cooperation. So by doing so, what they did was they opened the door, because there were so many of us, dude. I mean, there was ultimately over 300 kids, guys and gals, all over South Florida and Miami and as far as Kentucky. Were getting popped because of the mandatory minimums, and kids being scared. You tell a kid that's 19, 20, 21 years old that they're going to prison for 40 years, unless they cooperate, dude, they're going to give you their grandma's name. They're going to give you the grandpa's name, and shit like that.
That they can think of.
So, yeah, no shit. So what wound up happening is, because of the immunity clause that was built into these plea agreements, meant that, guys would come out of there saying, okay, no, they're talking about you, Jimmy and Teddy and Willie. And I think the best thing for you to do is, because they're coming for you, man. No doubt about it. When they take you and they are going to offer you this plea agreement, take it, because along with it comes immunity from prosecution from, everything that you tell them. So you can tell on Tommy and Willie and Johnny. They've already got this deal with immunity, and you can't hurt them. So everybody's telling back and forth on one another. Nobody's getting hurt, and they're getting out from under these multiple life sentences.
That is fucking awesome.
And I had the opportunity to help to try to reconcile in my mind about how this took place. Was years, here I am 35 years later. I'm working out at the LA Fitness, and I hear this guy talking to my buddy next to me, and he says something like U.S. Customs and, Marco Island, Naples, and in the 80s. And I really wasn't trying to pay attention. Until he said that shit. And I went, hey, I've got a history with U.S. Customs in the 80s, and shit like that. And he goes, I got my picture on one of those newspapers. I don't remember which one it was, like that. And so that was kind of the end of the conversation. I never gave it a second thought until I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, dude, there's no fucking way. I get home and I pull out my old yellow newspaper and open up, and there that fucker is. That's the supervisor for United States Customs. I just got done working out with the fucking guy. He was part of my, the group that was trying to put us all away for life. And long story short, we wind up being the dearest of friends, over that, because it turned out that, he understood. Now, this is a guy who had done, I think, 3 tours in Nam, came out a full bird colonel, just a badass fucking dude that probably, and he was special forces. He was,
Wow.
he was an Army Ranger. Probably kill you with his fucking pinky
Yeah.
fingers, and he got out of that and then went to the academy, in customs and border protection, and wound up riding a horse on the Arizona border for a couple of years till they put him into drug interdiction in the Eastern Caribbean, where he first gets a taste of us, and then they bring him and make him supervising agent for customs on our coast,
Right.
like that. So that's how I wound up meeting this guy. And what he imparted to me was this scenario whereby the government said, look, let's offer these people, a way out, but let's not tell them this is their way out. We figured it out,
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple, what I got immunity, tell them my name. But, it didn't work that way for me, but with the rest of the people, and it didn't matter to the United States government that, they were hearing a lot of the same names being repeated and said over and
Yeah.
over.
Probably helped. Yeah.
All that told them was that they're getting all the right people.
Right. Yeah.
When it came to a guy like me who's running the show, they want to know who the people in Miami are and where in the hell am I flying all over the fucking Caribbean rim, to see. Well, that fucking wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Because no matter how nonviolent we operated and how it was family oriented throughout the Caribbean, I was dealing with families that have been in this industry since it was an industry.
Yeah.
The guy I was dealing with in Colombia, the older generations dealt with his father before him. It was just that kind of thing. But you turn tail on one of these fucking guys, and they'll turn around and turn out to and turn into guys that do very good at getting rid of your ass and your family and everybody and the dog
Yeah.
and the cat. So you just don't do that. Even though it was nonviolent, you throw the guy under the bus like this, he's
That's a
coming in
different story.
to
Yeah.
shut your ass up. So my deal wasn't like everybody else's deal. It couldn't happen that way. My deal, my saving grace, came by way of two Treasury agents one day hauled me out of Fort Myers County Jail, where I've been locked up for 10 months. And handcuffed me, put a belly chain on, shackles on my ankles, and a chain from the belly chain to my ankles, doing the convict shuffle outside on the street corner around the building to the federal building next door. Good morning, good morning. I'm waving to people like this, They take me in there and they start questioning me about, how were you able to do this for all these years and we couldn't catch you? And I said, well, fuck, game over, dude. I can tell you that. I can tell you how stupid you are, but no names.
Right.
I mean, you can figure out a name along the way, more power to you. So I proceeded after, a couple of months of taking me out every other day, buying me a sandwich for lunch and like this, and, telling them, these scenarios about how all these, and I said, one of the first several questions that I asked these two Treasury agents were, it was a man and a woman. They come into the room, they slap their identical gold badges against this fucking window. And I'm going, oh shit. And the United States prosecutor, Susan Daltuva, heard me say that. She was in the next room. She comes busting through the door and she goes, Timmy. She says, this is not what you think it is. And I said, well, Susan, why don't you tell me what this is? Because it's cooperation. Just, unlock that door and take me back to my, to my cell, because that ain't happening. She said, no. What we'd like to know. And then she said, how were you able to do this for all this time? And then I said, okay, cool, I can tell you. First couple of questions I asked these two agents was, first of all, do you know the geography of Everglades City? Well, yeah. I said, okay, well, how many roads are there in and out of Everglades City? Well, there's one. Well, yeah, there's one fucking road. How many roads are there that are direct linked from Everglades City to Miami? There's one, US 41. That's right, one fucking road. And I said, well, we didn't take those millions of pounds of shit, over there by the backs of pelicans and fucking porpoises, man. It went down that one goddamn road right out of town, and half the time we're waving at you as we're doing it. That's just how it was. And so then I go on, week after week, and I am telling them about this and that, different scenarios, and working with Noriega and the house full of money and the amounts of money and the sheer volume of what it was we were doing. And after 6-7 weeks of imparting this knowledge that they had no clue about, One day they take me out. We're going down the same hallway I'm usually jogging down. They pass the door that we usually go into, and they put me in this other little room. They open it up, and there's one guy in the room sitting next to a little table with a chair next to it with a polygraph machine. I go in there and I sit down, and he hooked me up and all this kind of shit. Shut the door, and it's just me and this guy in there. He starts doing his thing and asking me all these questions about this and that and the stuff I was telling the agents, and all this kind of shit. And test gets over with, they unhook me and I stand up and they go to walk me out. And I kind of, look over my shoulder at the guy standing back in the room there like this. And the guy said, he, passed with flying colors. And they got this stupid look on their face. And I'm just grinning from ear to ear. They weren't believing what I was telling them because, who does this? I mean,
Yeah.
who unloads millions of pounds of shit? Nobody, we don't even know about it. And so, well, you stupid fuckers. That's who, it was just, embarrassing for them. It had to be. That's why the United States government will never tell you this story. You'll never hear about it from them. This is one of the reasons why I had to write the book.
Yeah.
And I got the blessings from the older generations because, telling it first person is somebody that has been there throughout the whole ride. And somebody that has worked on every position amongst the positions that were there to work, I could tell it more accurately and more truthfully. And what we weren't willing to do was wait, 10, 20 years, 30 years from now, when every one of us is fucking dead, and
Yeah.
some half-ass journalist or some historian gets all these articles and patch quilts together a story that they think took place.
Yeah.
We weren't going to allow that to happen. So I was, when I told them I was writing this book, they said, well, this is how it, tell it just like it is. And that's how I got the story about the second generation, Craig and his brothers,
Mm-hmm.
and them standing in front of the magistrate, and this is one of the reasons why the sentencing guidelines that they were handing out in those days weren't having the effect that they wanted them to have, because here we got 5 brothers standing in front of a federal magistrate in Miami, and he's reading off their list of seizures, and they've got a Netherlands Antilles holding company worth millions and properties all over the Caribbean. Here in the States, they've got houses, hotels, timeshares, motels, buses, cars, airplanes. One of the guys, Daryl, and his brother Craig, the youngest brother, they each had airplanes. They didn't have licenses to fly the fuckers. They just had money to buy them and paid a guy to show them how to fly the thing. So they had some shit to do. So all these seizures, and not only that, they seized 580,000 pounds of Colombian weed from these guys. Now, who the fuck's got 500,000+ pounds of shit laying around? Well, they do. So the judge is reading this, and then he comes to their sentencing. It's after having read this shit, and he says, gentlemen, he's flipping through the pages, and they're all standing up there in front of him, 5 brothers. Now, Craig the youngest brother, had been arrested for this type of thing once before. And the judge reminded him of it. He says, Mr. Daniels, this is your second time, having done this. But his other 4 brothers, this was their first time. And then he flipped through the pages again, and he looks at these guys, and he straight in the eye, and he says, gentlemen, he says, I have never in my career as a magistrate ever come across people quite like you. He says, there are no guidelines for people like such as yourselves. He says, I have no idea where to begin. And so he looks at his shit again, and he looks up. Now I'm hearing this from Craig, and I'm reading bits and pieces of the transcripts. And this magistrate looks at the other 4 brothers and gives them 36 fucking months.
Wow.
36 months, because that's all the guidelines called for at that time. And he looks at Craig and he says, okay, now remember, this is your second time around. And Craig's thinking, like, only 36 months, he's looking pretty good, So the judge says, he says, once again, Mr. Daniels, he goes, I have never in my life ever heard of or come across anybody quite like you. He says, now, does 5 years sound like a long time? He's asking Craig. And Craig goes, oh, yes, sir. That sounds like a hell of a long time. And the guy goes, 5 years. And in those days, he's out in less than 3, you
Yeah.
know? So considering that all this millions of shit and property and seizures and weed that they got from these guys, and they got 36 months, 2.5 years. And then a year later, here they come with, several years later, here they come with Operation Peacemaker. And now they're handing out life sentences for having done the same thing.
Oh yeah.
So the government, in their infinite wisdom, decides that, like I said, rather than by accident, they incorporated this by design in these plea agreements, because they discovered after the first 38 of us went that there was nobody left but kids to be arrested, because they'd taken everybody else over the last 2 operations,
Yeah.
And what they weren't willing to do was, because a year earlier they're giving out sentences that are providing for 2, 3, 4 years at the most, and now they're giving life sentences to kids who have done the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work out for them, even
That
in
up.
their own minds, to send kids away for life for what their parents have gotten
36
16
months.
months for
Yeah.
a year prior. So that's kind of how that all turned out, and it worked out great for all the other guys, and God bless them. They if they had hung on to their belief and not taking an agreement, dude, you're looking at I would still be in prison right now
Yeah.
if that were the case. But when it came to a guy like me, like I said, they wanted to know who I was dealing with and this and that. Well, I couldn't do that. The only thing I could do was tell them how it was done. And as it turned out, that was enough of them, for them to give me, um, they kept my sentence, after this, these sessions with them, the judge agreed to cap my sentencing at 20 years. They wouldn't give me any more than 20, but they couldn't give me less than 10, because they didn't consider what I was giving them substantial enough, because they wanted names,
Right.
and that wasn't fucking going to happen, like I said.
Yeah.
So, I took my lump. So I went in with 10 mandatory and doing my time, and in prison, anybody that's ever gone to prison, state or federal or otherwise, knows that you work.
Oh yeah.
You get a job, they put you to work. Well, my job, first of all, going into Tallahassee, federal correctional, was in construction. And I'm out on the rec yard one day after my week or two of being in there, and I said, I don't want to build this goddamn place, man. It's bad enough I'm in here, and let alone I got to help build the fucker. So I meet a guy, Rolando, out in the wet yard, and he was a clerk. He was a law clerk in the legal library, in the education building, and Tallahassee. Within the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Tallahassee is the hub of the Bureau of Prisons. If you are looking to get an education, they will, you'll request a transfer, they transfer you here, and they have a campus in the prison where they bring in civilian teachers and professors and whatnot to give you the education that you request and require. And along with that, every federal institution, and I'm sure state institutions are the same way, they need to provide inmates with access to law material so they can research and to work on their own cases. That's by law, that has to be done.
Right.
So I took a job in the legal library and I had to go down with Rolando and meet the head convict that was running the library. His name was Dennis Lehman. He was a bank robber. And he liked me right from the start. Immediately starts calling me Timmy. Everybody calls me Timmy. So I wind up getting the job. And now I'm a legal clerk and this and that. And Dennis's story is rather unique in and of itself. He was doing 52 years for bank robbery. He was in his 32nd year when I met him in prison.
Wow.
And he was is in the Guinness Book of World Records for having been given the most amount of time for that particular crime. And he didn't even rob the bank. He was waiting in an airplane to fly the 2 guys that actually robbed the bank out of there. One of the 2 guys got 6 years. The other guy got 12 years. Dennis got 52. The reason he got 52 years was because for a number of years prior to the bank robbery, he was flying cocaine from Mexico to Nevada, and they couldn't catch him. So when they finally had something to nail his ass with, they fucking pinned him to the board, man, and that's where he wound up in prison.
Dang.
For the majority of his life. But just one of the coolest guys you'd ever want to meet, but it's a shame that there are people like that because, in an environment such as that, there are absolutely people that deserve to be there, man. I mean, no
Yeah.
doubt about it. And then as you spend some time and you get to know some of the convicts and some of the inmates that are in there with you, well, there are just as many that don't deserve to
Don't.
be
Yeah.
there, for the
I
time that
agree
they're
with that.
doing. Hell, I met a guy that was, he was doing 11 months for assaulting a federal employee. And how that happened, quite simply, was he's walking his dog down the sidewalk in his neighborhood on a leash, and the mailman's coming the other direction, and the little dog's mailman pulls out his shit and squirts the dog, maces the dog. Well, the guy's pissed, obviously, and he bitch slaps the fucking mailman. That was the assault on the federal employee that he got 11 months for.
Wow, that's crazy.
Just ridiculous shit. Another guy was in there for 9 months for destruction of federal property. Check this out. He's in a 7-Eleven buying stamps. You put the money in the thing and and your stamp drops out.
Yeah.
Well, he puts his money in it, no stamps. So he hits the thing like this, and he hits it like this, and he hits it like this, and he finally backs up and he kicks it with his foot. And the girl behind the counter, she's calling the fucking cops because he's beating the shit out of the fucking stamp machine. Cops show up and arrest him for destruction of federal property. He got 9 months in federal prison for fucking hitting a goddamn stamp machine. Are you
Oh,
shitting me?
it's situations like that when people go through shit like that, they'll never look at cops the same way again. Like it's
No, because it's
fucking
just,
ruins it.
it's ridiculous. Some of it gets to a point where it's just absolutely stupid.
Yeah.
And then, you got guys like us who were hauling, literally millions of pounds of shit into this country, and ultimately being given the opportunity by our government showing its so-called benevolence by allowing us to take these agreements and allowing us to deduct these mandatory life sentences because we were kids,
Right.
and they weren't willing to do that. When you've still got people up that are doing life for 3 times around, you
Yeah.
know 3 times around. Your third time was caught with a fucking half a joint, and you're
Yeah.
doing life in prison. When a guy like me who you know gets indicted for almost 400,000 pounds. And I do, ultimately out of that 10, I wound up getting since I was working in the legal department, in prison, I wound up getting a literary arts degree, and I got an associate's degree in paralegal studies while I was there because my job was to help inmates research and find their way through the law books. So I figured what a great opportunity. And I did a correspondence course through the University of Honolulu and got this degree so I could be more confident in being able to help and research and shepherdize is what it's calling. You shepherdize cases to find
Right.
Cases similar to yours that have points of interest that are similar to yours that were adjudicated differently than you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you cite all these different cases, and the clerk has to read these cases. And if it all adds up to where because our jurisprudence system is done on what they call or it'll come to me, but it all has to do with fairness in sentencing. It all has to be consistent.
Right.
I can't be arrested and put in prison for something that somebody else got adjudicated not guilty for
Right.
or got less time for. So you find these cases with similar aspects and you put them together to support your argument, is
Mm-hmm.
how it works. So I put together my own argument for reduction of sentence out of that mandatory 10 years to life because they were getting my friends and everybody out of prison and sending them home for what they called cooperation. Well, you know I'm sitting in the law library one day and I'm just flipping through the pages of a dictionary called Black's Legal Dictionary. And Black's Legal Dictionary is the dictionary that is used by prosecuting and defense attorneys that defines all legalese. All its that takes them and not only gives you definitions of specific types of law, but explains to you the Latin versions of what it is, that they call, whatever. And I get to cooperation. their definition in Black's Legal Dictionary of Cooperation. And basically what I'm reading is that if somebody asks you for something and you give that to them, by that definition, you have cooperated with them. Well, I'm sitting there thinking, well, fuck, they wanted $4 million in fines. Here you go. They wanted to know how all this shit was done, and they spent months drilling me and grilling me and shit to find that out. Well, I did that. So essentially, according to this definition, I cooperated with these bastards. So I hinged and wrote my brief based on that definition of cooperation in the dictionary that they use to define all their language. And I wound up getting myself cut from 10 to 4.
Wow.
And when that happened, I was already 3.5 years in. So I'm standing there. I didn't want to writ out and go to my own, hearing, because I would have lost my bunk. It took me 2 years to get to the, people have to die or they got to get their sentences over before you can move your place in the bunk, in the dorm. Now, Tallahassee is an old Shawshank Redemption style looking building, and it's an older prison. In the sections that I was in, the 4 original units, I was in E unit, no air conditioning, just fans. I mean, it was a fucking hellhole. And so I let my brother go. I finally took me, from getting in the center of the room. I got my bunk now against the wall, next to a window, a little bit more privacy, that kind of thing, where I could sit in the top bunk and I could see everybody in the room, because they weren't individual cells that we were locked into at this time. There's 175 convicts per unit.
Yeah.
Setting cubicles. So if you got problem with somebody, you need to get your shit done, or, get it figured out, or sleep with one fucking eye open, because it's coming. This is just how it was. It's a gladiator school. And so, what winds up taking place is, here I am, 3.5 years into this thing. I didn't want to go. I sent my brother to the hearing, and I sat in line for 3 hours waiting to get my spot on the phone, called him up, and I said, well, how'd it go, man? I said, tell me something. And the first thing out of his mouth, he says, were you fucking that prosecutor or something, man? Because, she talked pretty good about you. What are you talking about? He said, yeah, and all the stuff you were telling them and this and that, they really appreciated it and stuff like that. They caught the judge's attention. And I said, all right, well, besides all of that shit, fuck that shit. What'd I wind up with? And he said, 4 years. And I said, what? He said, 4 fucking years. And here I am, 3.5 in. I got 6 months now left to do it. I about screaming. I about fell over and pulled the phone off the wall now. I was yelling and whooping and yahoo. I'm 6 months short now. It's, it was awesome.
That's crazy, man. I mean, you got so many more stories. We're already running over a little bit, but it's hard to stop. You got so many good stories in prison, folks. I can't stress to you how much enough. I'm going to put a link to the book, on the show notes here for the YouTube channel. You guys have got to go get this book. It dives into a lot more stuff in detail, that Tim did. And then, the experiences you had in prison. The one where you wouldn't tell on the guy that whacked you over the head, I thought was a really good one too. Like I said,
yeah, that was, that kind of, I was expecting that,
yeah.
That was just out of the blue here that come, man, but it worked out in the end.
Yeah.
And one of the stories that I think is important for people to hear is how we got called that moniker, Saltwater Cowboys.
Yeah.
Was that one. I think if you got a couple minutes, I'll tell you. Otherwise, we can.
Oh, no, you're doing me the favor here. So if you want to tell it, you go right ahead.
Well, I'll leave you with this story, about how the book got its name and how I got called, Saltwater Cowboy. I've been working for, almost a year, by now. And, it's the typical scenario on how it works is us as the load vessel that's going out to meet the mothership. We typically sit off of the horizon until, 3-4 hours before sundown. And the horizon on the water is how far you can see with your naked eye before things go out of sight. So we would sit just off the horizon, and on the water, that's typically anywhere between 8 and 10 miles, depending on how big the vessel is and how high it stands above the water. So we would sit off the horizon and wait for 2 or 3 hours before sundown. Every boat that we're out there to meet, we're given prior a call sign. Call the boat, call the boat. They recognize the call sign and say, come on. So they know that the boat coming to them is the one that should be, they're expecting us. So we're coming up to this boat, and I've been doing this for, like I said, almost a year now. And I thought I'd seen, about every way there is to haul a load of pot, by this time, but I wound up being severely wrong about this one, because the captain, he hands me a pair of binoculars and he goes like this. He says, check this out, man. He says, you're not going to believe what you're about to see. So I'm looking through the binoculars like this, and we're getting closer to the boat, and it's a cattle transport. The guy they hired to move this load of weed was his business was buying cattle in South America and selling it in New Orleans and selling them here in the States. So he's always making this trip. So consequently, somebody approaches him and says, hey, man, you want to make some extra cash? Oh, yeah. Fuck yeah. So the stuff was put down below deck, below the main weather deck. And the main weather deck is where all these cattle are. And he's got, big fenced in corral looking thing around the boat. Well, there's probably 150 head of cattle on this goddamn boat, as near as I can tell. And I'm looking, and the closer we get, and all of a sudden the fan gates open up on the back of the boat, and these guys start cattle prodding these fuckers off the back of the boat. And these cows are like, it's like a bovine waterfall. They're just nowhere to go but into the water, and they're splashing. All kind of shit. It was just a vision that I can't ever get out of my mind. And as we pull up to the boat, it took two boats to get the load. So there's two of our boats pull up there, and there's horns and there's hooves, there's clunking on the hull, and we're hearing and the cows are rolling their eyes and shit. They're drowning in the water right next to us, and we're thinking, what in the fuck? So we pull up, and they start throwing the stuff down. They had it all ready. They start throwing the stuff down to us, and the captain of my boat, he yells up there and he goes, what in the fuck's going on? And the captain of that boat, the mother boat, he's leaning against the rip, peeling an orange, and he goes, you know what? We can't get these goddamn shit off the boat with all these cows in the way. So they run their asses off the fucking boat. We get the load and shit, and we're thinking, holy fucking shit, man. So we get back into town and, back into the offload, and we're offloading. And the next day, the shit's getting sent to Miami, and we're telling you guys about these assholes with the cows on the boat, right? And we thought that was the end of it, So 2-3 weeks goes by, and I don't know how many jobs in the meantime we do, 4 or 5, and here comes this goddamn boat again, the same one. Only this time there's not only cows, there's goats, there's pigs, there's chickens, and they had monkeys, these little spider monkeys that come out of the jungle, and they get on the boat at night. Primarily, if the boat's close enough to when they can load, which a lot of times they can get in close enough like that, the monkeys get on there and they eat the seeds.
Yeah.
And they wind up falling asleep between the bales, as they're stacked. They wake up, they come out of their stupor, and they're offshore. They're stuck on this goddamn boat. There had to have been, 2 dozen of these goddamn monkeys on this boat. And here we come again. I'm watching, all of a sudden, gates open up again, and off the fucking boat they go, and it was like these damn monkeys knew exactly what was happening, dude. They hit the light, the mast, the light mast, the towers, the antennas and everything, because they think they knew what was happening there. They weren't getting off this fucking boat. It was the funniest thing I saw, until with the cow thing again, So we pull up there, and the same shit. The cows are everywhere, and finally, during the offloading, our captain, he yells up to at the captain of the other boat. He says, "Look, man," he says, "we're not doing this shit anymore." He says, "Don't come back here again." He says, "This is not right." For one thing, the poor fucking cows. For one thing. Second of all, we can't have them continue to wash up on the beaches in Fort Myers and Marco Island because that's where they were winding up. These fucking cows were up on the beach. You know, it's one thing to be walking down the beach and, you know, you trip over a conch shell or a dead fish or something like that, but it's very much another thing to be walking on the beach and stumble over a fucking dead cow. You know, somebody's got to be raising an eyebrow or two. So we said, you know, don't ever come back. You know, don't do this again. So we bring this shit back in and we tell the crew again, hey, these fuckers came back, man, you know, with these cows. And that's how the whole, you bunch of cowboys, you know, you saltwater cowboys is what you guys are. That's how it started. So from that point on, and it's very few people, you know, a close knit group of people understand that that's how that moniker came about, Saltwater Cowboy. And hence the name of the book. So
Yeah,
there you go.
it was a fantastic book. I'll probably wind up getting the hard version myself. I might send it to you and get your autograph on there. I listened to the Audible version, and it was a couple of times where I had, you know, my little earpiece in there, and I just start cracking up, and people would look at me like, "What the hell are you laughing at?" And I just have to tell them parts of the story, and get
there
them
was
interested.
just so much. Yeah, you know, because there was, I mean, so much history to tell, so much craziness to tell, to talk about. And when I was contracted with my literary agency was Foundry Literary and Media in Manhattan, and I wound up signing with St. Martin's Press after I turned down Random House and Doubleday. You know, the reason I did that was because of the it wasn't the most lucrative deal through them, but I knew by that time that if I didn't get it on the front end, I would get it as royalty on the back end. Either way, I'm going to get the money. Right. So I chose St. Martin's Press not because they are described by Wikipedia as being the world's largest publishers of the English language, and they publish under 7 other imprints around the world. Right. So I thought, if I'm going to choose these people, they can take this thing and just run with it, you know, and go with it. So I chose St. Martin's Press. And little did I know that the author of Blow, Bruce Porter, who wrote George Young's story, was also a St. Martin's Press author. Mm-hmm. And during the time I was copy editing and working on my book became the in-house favorite at St. Martin's Press, and word got around, and Bruce decided he needed an advance copy of this book because he wanted to check it out. Well, it blew his freaking brain out of his head. He said, "No, I've got to offer this guy a review for the back of his book." So there's only 2 back there on the back of the book. One is the Kirkus review, and Kirkus is you know, they're big time, you know, reviewers of books, particularly fond of bashing authors, particularly new authors. But they wound up for, you know, giving me an awesome review. It was, you know, you know, surprised me. You know, I was flattered that they had done that. Plus the review that Bruce Porter offered was very cool. So that's on the back of the book. You should read that one.
Yeah, that's definitely, people, you got to go out here and track down this book. If you know, if you're not into the sitting and flipping the pages, get the Audible. It's on the Audible. You don't.
There's a Kindle version.
Yeah, Kindle version as well. And we're, like I said, we're going to attach it to the show notes.
There's an MP3 CD as well.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So that's all on Amazon. Any ways you guys can listen to them, folks, is out there. Listening / read, whatever you want to do. There's so many more stories that we couldn't possibly fit into this episode. Great.
Dude, you got another 6 hours. We can get through maybe half of it. Because I was contracted for an 80,000 word document through St. Martin's Press when I went to go ahead and write this book. In the process of writing it, I wrote over 200,000 words and condensed it into an 86,000 word volume that you read now.
Wow.
Because and a lot of it was left out, like you know, my working for Noriega. That's a story that's, you know, we'll have me back, dude, and we'll talk some more about that.
Yeah, let me a part 2.
But yeah, that's Saltwater Cowboy, man. And it is the history of marijuana in this country, how it began with a guy named Loren Tots Brown in the 60s, and how it ended with my crew in the mid 80s. And it's not a boring statistical romp through the war on drugs, dude. It's just me, a regular guy sitting on the couch next to you, telling you this awesome fucking story that's, you know, unbelievable at best.
Yeah.
You know, but the absolute truth. And And I say that with complete confidence because when I was being interviewed by Susan Robbins, who is the publisher herself of St. Martin's Press, I was on with the executive editor, the executive in charge of sales, Susan Robbins, the publisher, and two other executives. I forget what the hell their positions were, but the only thing that the editor herself asked me about after hearing all this because of the craziness and the the sheer amounts of money and material involved in the story, she asked me about validity, validating the story. And I said, okay, well, who would you like me to introduce to you? CIA, Secret Service, FBI, DEA, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, you know, who do you want to talk to? And she said, perfect. I don't care. That's great. Perfect. So I had Mark Resnick being their senior editor. He's the one that championed my story at the beginning with all the executives of St. Martin's Press. This is why it got such a big, a big following, within the publishing house itself. But Mark wanted so desperately to work with me, but he was finishing at that time a book called American Sniper. Mm-hmm. Once that book was finished, the editor that had taken me on in the meantime, we got halfway through the book, Johan Soha, and something else unprecedented within this realm of writing and publishing took place, where we only did one edit in the first half of the book. Wow. That was all that was required, because it was nothing. I mean, the book was written in such a way that there was no editing to be done to it.
Hard to take anything away.
And then I wound up lucking out, because when he took a job as senior editor for Doubleday, Mark Resnick stepped up and helped me, edit through the second half of the book. With Mark, I only did 2 edits with him. I told him, I sent him everything that I had written for the second half of the book, so he would understand the direction I was going, mm-hmm. With the story. And my literary agent at that time said, why did you do that? Why did you give him the whole thing? I said, well, he's got to get an idea about where it goes. And I said, don't worry about it. He gives me 1 or 2, things to edit. I'll understand what he wants, and I'll give him exactly. And that's what happened. He said, I would like to see a little more of the craziness with regards to the smuggling and a little less of the prison time. So I just tweaked that a little bit. And the entire book only took 3 edits. And it went to copy edit, at that point.
Yeah, that's unprecedented, because that don't usually happen. It's usually edited quite a bit in most cases.
Yeah, back and forth. But because it was a tale that it's only one person that can tell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, straight exactly. From here to the pay.
You can't put a group of guys in a room and try to figure out ways to change the story, because they don't know the story. It's you.
In its history, you can't fuck with that. And that being said, one of the several of the local universities here in Southwest Florida, Florida Gulf Coast University, for instance, they teach 5 different courses about cannabis, because Florida has become medically legal, and right. They're trying to help people who are not regular students, but civilians from off campus can come in and take these courses just to help understand it a little bit better, the medical benefits, and of course the history. That's where I come in. My book was a required historical text for these classes because of the history that it imparts in the way it's told. Wow. So we're really proud of that. So I lecture with the university and the kids, a couple times a month or once a month or whatever like that when the new semesters come up. So that's right. A lot of fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, man, I tell you what, this has been one fantastic fucking story, and I gotta ask, because it's, there's so much craziness in it. I'm sure the money flowed, the parties was there, the good times were had. Obviously, you did wind up taking the pinch. You had to go away for a few years. Luckily, only 4. They wanted to give you a lot more. I was
given 160 years mandatory to life and $16 million in fines in the beginning.
Jesus. Yeah, well, you made out like a fucking bandit.
I couldn't even wrap my mind around it. It just didn't mean anything to me, because that's just ludicrous, man.
If you knew how all this was going to play out, starting over, would you do it again? Would you do everything you did again?
If I knew it would turn out the way it turned out again?
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, it was just, as a kid, who grows up like that as a kid? Yeah. Who unloads freighters from every corner of the Caribbean, people just, people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, when I get together with a buddy or somebody that I knew, and they've got a friend that they'll say, hey, hey, Jimmy, tell my buddy one of these crazy ass stories, and shit like that. I'm like, you know, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, once I say something like 20 tons, I've lost them
Yeah.
because, it's just to them it's an unbelievable fact of life. But for me and the guys that I grew up with, and even a lot of the guys I grew up with wondered, why are you writing a book, and who want to hear about that? Well, me being who I am, I saw the big picture.
Yeah.
I know people, when you say shit like this and the unbelievable amounts of shit that we were moving, people are going to want to know this. They're going to want to hear it, but they're going to need the validation in order for it to make sense to them, and to realize that, yeah, this is actually how it took place. And that's why I have, most of these guys who were at the CIA and Secret Service come to run interdiction vessels for customs, and their supervisors and FBI, all these people. That's why, a lot of these guys are, several of them are my dear friends now, because it was just what they were doing and was what I was doing. And now they all say it was a waste of fucking time, because they got absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
Except for that last operation. I wound up, and I'll make this quick and sweet. The supervisor and the resident agent for Homeland Security in South Florida contacted me about 5-6 years ago, wanted to meet me, wanted to talk to me, wanted to meet a legend, he called me. I started laughing. I said, what? He said, yeah, come and have a chat with me. Let's talk. And so he, during our conversation, imparted to me a simple fact that when they stopped my crew and all these Southwest Florida crews that, during that Operation Peacemaker, that literally ended Caribbean marijuana coming into the United States. It ended. That was in the late 80s, early 90s.
So
And
you're
if
the
you're
guy.
old enough, and if you're old enough, and anybody watching this is old enough to remember those days, and that distinctive paradigm shift in the marijuana industry was that Southwest Florida got cut off from the importation, and now comes the Sinaloa show up. Now they've been around. I knew about these guys. They've been around forever, but now all of a sudden, the Mexicans and the Gulf Cartel, the Juarez cartel, and the Arellano Felix brothers, who are running the Tijuana cartel, wound up taking advantage of us having abandoned, or rather being taken out of the picture. Well, Mexico didn't want the Colombian weed or the Caribbean weed. They want to sell their own Mexican brickweed crap.
Yeah.
So from that point on, no more Caribbean marijuana was coming into the country. It was going to North Africa and into Europe. Now is where it goes. The Mexican cartels wanted the cocaine because they couldn't grow the coca plant. They didn't need the weed because they could grow that. They didn't need the heroin because they could grow that poppy and make brown tar heroin. They just couldn't grow the coca plant. So that was the paradigm shift, and everything shifted into Mexico, and that's how all this crazy, absurd death and destruction and extortion of people being made to be brought bales, hump a bale through the desert kind of shit like that,
Wow.
and having that bit of the industry taking place and making the shift in the direction that it did, pissed us all off in a matter of speaking, because now you've taken an industry that away from a group of people that never fired one fucking shot. I mean, we never saw guns. I never saw guns as a kid. It was not allowed. It was just, it never happened because it was never necessary. Even if, one of us fucked up as kids or whatever, and there was no corporal punishment. Nobody got their asses whipped. You never got smacked in the back of the head and shit like that. It was, you don't work for 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Well,
That's your punishment.
you just got your ass spanked, dude, because you just lost $100 grand.
Yeah. That was the punishment.
That's how it worked. And that's one of the likable things about the story. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote it, and was able to tell it the way I did, so people understand that now, because of the changes in the marijuana laws, whether it's recreationally legal or it's medically legal, people who now have the opportunity to try it for the first time legally, to make that decision, on their own. I would like them to understand the true history and the true nature of how this material, this cannabis, was brought to this country in the early days. not what they're seeing on the border of Mexico, because that's a distorted version, and a version that I don't really like even thinking about,
Right.
you know, because they're showing, you know, if you show a medically graded, beautiful looking bud glistening in the sun with all its goodness, and you show another picture of some poor Mexican bastard who's been extorted and his family's being held in lieu of him getting that bail across the, you know, the border, which one are you going to point to? Which one do you want to smoke?
Yeah.
You know, you're going to smoke this nice bud here. And that was why in the early 90s, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Emerald Triangle in Northern California, the Trinity, Mendocino, and um, I know there's one other county, but anyways, that's when homegrown started becoming a thing, you know. But
Yeah.
more importantly, I wanted people to, you know, to know this history and know this beginning and how it was done non-violently, because when you're trying it for the first time, I would rather have them have an image of that cool Rasta dude standing out in his crop, you know, with his dreads and just, you know, rolling this big spliff flip and a banana leaf or some shit, or this, you know, cool little Colombian guy and his family in his all cotton white shirt and his big white cotton white hat, just tending bud. You know, that's the feeling I want people to have when they try this for the first time. That sense of, you know, ease and just coolness, you know, that type
Yeah.
of thing. Not what they're seeing on the Mexican border. That just distorts and, you know, it just gives me a bad feeling inside, you
Right.
know. So
No.
it's important that they read this, because this is exactly how it took place, and there's no room for any kind of embellishment,
Right.
because, and I've been asked about that because of the ridiculous amounts that I'm talking about. You know, 28 days we worked one month to the tune of 1.6 million pounds was my rough guesstimate, you know, in 28 days. Now, and all done non-violently and in such a way where, you know, we never hurt anybody, you know,
Yeah.
really. So that's what I want people to understand. That's the story I want them to come into their first experience with.
Yeah, and those are unprecedented numbers you just threw around. And like you said, to do it non-violently, it's just Hollywood and the news media and stuff. They try to put a different spin on things and make you think you guys are out there cutthroat and killing each other and throwing each other out of the water. And it
And
wasn't
that's
the
not to
case.
say that those scenarios didn't take place. I mean, there were guys out there that were working on their own. Like I said, we're not the only ones that ever hauled pot. And I never
Right.
take anything. I never, you know, I never dismiss anybody or try to take anything away from anybody that's ever done that. But, you know, there were guys out there that were, you know, operating under those, you know, conditions and those terms, because
Right.
they have every bit of their money involved and tied up into that, what it is they're doing,
Yeah.
you know. And the way that we were working was that it wasn't my money, it wasn't our money, and it was so much money involved in it that, you know, I could lose a load. And like I said, I had 32 chances to get your shit in to still make money,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing.
So the
So
pressure, it takes a lot of the pressure off. Like I'm sure, just you're like, you got, like you said, if you lose one, two, hell, even three in a row, you still way to the good. It's just
it
like
didn't matter.
yeah,
Go back and get some more, you know, we still got plenty of money. You know, we made 9 million, we made 10 million and got our 300,000 back, you know. What do we care? We're still making money after 30 or 31 losses. Get that last win. We're still making money. You know, that was just how it was. So this is what I want people to understand. This is why it's important that, you know, just pick the book up, man, and have a read. It's an easy read. It was written. I chose to write the book in what's called the Chicago Manual of Style, which is a little more grammatically forgiving with regards to an English style of writing. Um, or an American style of writing that allows me to tell the story more to my voice,
right.
you know, more to my character with that regard. So, you know, pick it up and have a read and just, you know, enjoy the shit out of it, man. It takes you through every range of emotion. And even still, when I read my story back to myself, there's times when I'm laughing, I'm giggling, and I'm crying. I'm every bit of emotion that I wrote in there. And there's nothing more gratifying to an author than to have their book turn out exactly the way they intended it. And my intention was to grab you, pull you to the front of your seat in the first chapter, and keep you there to the end of the book.
Well, you damn sure succeeded with me, and I'm sure you'll do so with anybody that takes our advice and goes and picks this up, whether you're reading it or listening to it, folks. It's a fantastic book. You do not want to miss it. Some of what we covered here, but so much more in the book that we couldn't possibly fit into an episode. So go out,
That's
get that book.
for sure.
And Tim, we want to appreciate you coming by the show, man. You've been a fantastic interview. I'm sure we'll have you on again, later on down the
Brother,
road.
I'm glad you found me all the way up there in South Carolina, man. And it's, it's really gratifying for me to know that there are guys out there like you that appreciate me and appreciate a story that reads and that tells the way this one tells, because it's, like I said, regardless of where you sit on the fence with this issue in this industry, the story is for everybody.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't pick out or single out the stoners, and it doesn't do anything like that. What it does is it imparts to you and helps you understand how this industry operated for over 40 years and was done by families.
Yeah.
And once again, and I'll say it again and I'll keep saying it, no kudos to anybody that ever hauled a load of pot. But all I'm saying when I wrote this book is that we were the only ones able to integrate it into a way of life spanning 40 years and 3 generations.
That's impressive, man. That is impressive indeed.
And thank you for having me, man. And I'd be honored to come back and talk with your people and talk with you again. Anytime.
Absolutely, man. That'd be fantastic. If you ever get down here, Charleston, around my way, give me a holler, man. We'll have to get up and grab a beer or something for sure.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. I would dig the shit out of that for sure.
All right. Well, folks, there you have it. The incredible tale of Tim Mcbride. Be sure to pick up that book, Saltwater Cowboy, The Rise and Fall of a Marijuana Empire. I am Hollywood Wade. That was Tim Mcbride. And unfortunately, we are out of time. Please tune in next week to an all new episode of Crime and Entertainment. Tim, we appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you, my man. See you, everybody.